Hey Math All-Stars, it's Dr. Conklin here to do a review video on what Mr. Fields covered yesterday with the 4 ways to show triangles are congruent. So I've listed them here: SSS, SAS, ASA, and AAS. And we're going to take a little bit of a focus on these 2 today. And before we jump into our packet, we're going to be on page 13. I want to just go over with you guys the difference between these 2. And again, I know Mr. Fields covered it, but it's one of the trickier topics. So if we're trying to show that 2 triangles are congruent, it can be a little bit hard to figure out what to do when. So what I want to do is just give you guys a picture of angle, side angle. When do we have angle, side angle? Well, let's say I have this guy congruent to this guy congruent to this guy, and I know these 2 sides. This is angle, side angle. And let me just show you how I like to use this. And again, a highlighter is always a great strategy or tool, especially in geometry. I'm going to highlight our included side. Now, what do I mean by that word included? So if you look here, the S is in between or included. The included side touches not just one of the congruent angles, but both. So let me highlight this angle and this angle. And then I'm also going to do the same, highlight the other angle. And if you notice here, again, I'll go back to my yellow. Is the yellow, the congruent side, touching both the congruent angles? And it is. Now look at this here, angle, angle, side. This S is not in between. So let me draw a similar picture, angle, angle, swoop, 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 swoop. And then I'm going to make this the congruent side. So let's go back through and try this again. I'm going to highlight this angle and this angle, right? Those are corresponding angles we want to show are congruent. And then I'm going to highlight this angle and this angle. Now look what happens when I color in yellow the congruent side. Do you guys see how this congruent side here, right, down here, this guy here, those 2 sides, right? Oh, that arrow's not very good. Sorry, let me make sure. This here and this here, right? They are not touching all the congruent angles, right? These 4 guys over here, there's no one touching them. So that's really the hint to has you know that you need to use angle, side angle, or angle, angle, side. Okay, so we're going to come back to this picture, but let's turn to page 13 and we're going to do just a couple examples to go over this. So on page 13, remember our strategy. When we're trying to prove something, we're going to start with our given. Oh my gosh, this jazz music, my 9th grade class loves it, but it's going to put me to sleep, guys. Actually, this is my second filming of this video because I fell asleep making the first one. The jazz music was so calming. All right, so we are going to mark up AC congruent to DF, angle A congruent to angle D, and angle B congruent to angle E. So again, notice I'm using 2 little marks there. So let's just take a second and talk about this. Now I love, actually we're not going to use this HL, so every place you see you can cross it off. I like doing a little checklist, and I sort of set it up for us in this worksheet. We have in this problem, we have a side, an angle, and an angle. So let's use cross sublimation, great SAT strategy for those of you looking to get into amazing colleges. All of you should be. I'm going to get rid of SSS and SAS. Why? Because I have 2 angles here. So this is what we talked about a little bit before. How am I going to figure out which one of these it's going to be? So let's try our highlighting strategy. I'm going to highlight A, highlight D, I'm going to highlight B, highlight E. So I've matched up the corresponding angles. Now I'm going to take my highlighter and highlight the congruent side. Is that red line touching all the angles? It's not, right? So I'm just going to go back and look at my picture. When we have not touching, that means the side is not included, right? Like up here, we had our included side. If we have not touching, that means it's going to be angle, angle, side. Okay, and let's contrast that with over here, number 2. But before we do, oh my goodness, it's so exciting. One of my favorite words in all of geometry. It's not my favorite word, but midpoint is pretty awesome. So we're just going to take like a 1-minute venture into what is a midpoint, because I think you guys know this already. Now, our English teacher friends would tell us that a midpoint is a compound word because it has 2 words in it, mid and point. So here's a midpoint. A midpoint is a point in the middle of a line segment. So let's say if this whole line was 10 centimeters, and here's our little midpoint, I would know that this side and this side are the same, which would be 5 centimeters, right? I just cut it in half. So what does a midpoint really do? Well, if I put a midpoint in a triangle picture, like if I look at this triangle picture here and say this little, well, I'll make it an orange dot now. Say I tell you guys that's a midpoint. Well, a midpoint here is going to make these 2 pieces congruent. Voila. A midpoint gives us 2 congruent segments. So what's nice is if you see the word midpoint in any proof, it usually means we have a pair of congruent sides. Okay, so let's go back up to number 2. You guys are probably still there. I just was so excited about midpoint. I'm going to mark my picture up. All right, they told us we have a straight line, which doesn't really tell us much, but we know angle A is congruent to angle C. Again, I'm marking my picture. You should be doing this with me. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Now, here's what we just learned. B is the midpoint. So if we have a midpoint, these 2 segments are congruent. So again, cross out this HL. How are we going to show these triangles are congruent? Well, let's do our trick. First, I'm going to eliminate what I can. We have an angle, and a side. So there's no way it could be SSS. There's no way it can be SAS. So it's one of these 2. How are we going to figure it out? Well, let's highlight our angles. I'm going to highlight angle A, which matches with angle C. I'm going to highlight angle 1, which matches with angle 2. And now, voila, I'm going to highlight the congruent side. That's the congruent side. That's the congruent side. Do you guys notice how all these angles are touching the congruent side? So if we go back to our picture we talked about before, there's nothing left out. Like in these pictures over here, right? These angles were left out. Now, this is exactly what we have, an included side. So this is going to be angle, side, angle. Okay, let's tackle a few more and then I'll give you guys some homework. So this is another important idea, my wonderful students. AB is congruent to AD. So again, we're trying to show these 2 triangles are congruent. And one hint, this is almost like if I took this and folded it over, do you guys see how CA is actually symmetrical, right? It creates a line of symmetry for these shapes. That's going to help us. It's almost like it's a reflection. Like if I took this triangle here and I folded it over, it would be a reflection, right? Or if I was off the plane, okay? So let's mark this up. AB is congruent to AD. BC is congruent to DC. Oh no, but Dr. Conklin, you say, we only have 2 congruent sides. But wait, look at this, guys. I'm gonna just outline for a second this triangle. Then I'm gonna do the same thing over here. What do we notice? Does everyone see that right here in this space, AC is actually in both triangles? So AC is congruent to AC. And if you remember from our notes last week, when that happens, this is called reflexive property. And it gives us actually another side. So this is pretty easy. Side, side, side. Okay, last one, and then we'll take a peek at homework. Let's mark this picture up. So we're given AD is congruent to BC. DE is congruent to CE. We want to prove these triangles congruent. So a lot of times when students see there's only 2 pieces of information given, we have a side and a side, they'll say, oh, I'm just going to put a little 1 and 2 here and make them congruent. No way, Jose. You can't say that anything is congruent unless you're told that, or you have a good mathematical reason, right? Like here we had our friend the midpoint. Here we could look at the picture and see we had some overlapping parts. Here, do we have anything going on? Right, even if we look here, those are not vertical angles. So this would be an example when nothing is gonna work. We don't have enough information. 2 sides is not enough. All right, so what I'm gonna have you guys do is sort of jump to page 15 at the very top. Homework tonight is gonna be these questions. And I wanna just do one of them with you guys so you know what to expect. If we look at number 7, we're gonna sort of go through and I'm just gonna mark to see things that are equal. So if I look at this, I see that we have 3 sides that are congruent. Oops. Right, 3 pairs of sides, so just be careful with that. I said it sort of funny. This guy matches with this guy, and then this matches with this. So this is side, the reason for this is side, side, side. So in this picture, what you are going to do is you are going to first just sort of take a look like I did, mark it up. And then what I would like you to do is to name the triangle. So A, B, C. So if I go A to B to C, what I like to do is notice there's 3 marks here and 2 marks here. When I'm naming this triangle, the other one, I'm going to do the same thing. So I want to go start here, go down the 3 sides, down the 2. So I'm going to name it I, L, H. And then I sort of already showed you guys, because we have this side congruent to this side congruent to this side, and this side congruent to this side, we can use SSS. So in all of these, 8 through 12, if you could do the same thing, finish your congruent statement, and then choose one of the 4 reasons, which are, ASA, to show why triangles are congruent. Have a super day. Made it through my second filming of this without falling asleep to the jazz music. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. We'll see you soon and keep up the great work. We got this, All Stars.